This is the new 2020 Mercedes-Benz GLE, and it's the latest mid-size luxury SUV from Mercedes-Benz. Now, luxury SUVs like this don't have a lot of appeal to car enthusiasts, but they are very, very popular. And it seems like a new luxury SUV comes out every other week. Today, I'm going to review the new GLE to see if it belongs on your luxury SUV shopping list. I've borrowed this GLE from Fletcher Jones Motor Cars, which is the gold standard of Mercedes-Benz dealerships. It's located here in Orange County in Southern California, and obviously Fletcher Jones has all of the latest Mercedes-Benz models, but I've been especially excited to check out the new GLE, which has just gone on sale. First, a little overview. Now, the GLE is the new name for the Mercedes-Benz M-Class, which was one of the very first mid-size luxury SUVs when it came out more than 20 years ago as the ML320. Mercedes renamed it the GLE a few years ago to bring it in line with its other SUVs, the smaller GLC and the larger GLS. But this is the new GLE, completely redesigned from the ground up for the 2020 model year. The GLE is offered in two versions. The base model, GLE 350, uses a turbocharged four-cylinder with 255 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque. Or you can upgrade to this one, the GLE 450, which uses a turbocharged six-cylinder with 362 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. And I'm sure a more powerful AMG version is on the way. Now, the base GLE 350 starts around $57,000, and the 450 is only about $5,000 more to start, which is a pretty small price jump considering the added power. Now, the GLE's closest rivals are the BMW X5, the Lexus RX and GX, the Audi Q7, and the Porsche Cayenne, although the GLE offers an available third-row seat, unlike some of those competitors. Today, I'm going to take you on a tour of the new GLE, and I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and features of the newest Mercedes-Benz SUV. Then, I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the GLE, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the best old-school luxury SUVs currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the GLE with something you notice when you first get in and turn it on, and that is that the headlights do a little dance when you do. Now, a lot of cars' headlights kind of go up and down and then get level, but the GLEs go a step further. Take a look. Now, that's a little odd, and frankly, I think kind of distinctive and cool, but not all that unusual. But it gets a little bit more unusual because when you pull the hood latch to open the hood, the headlights also do a little dance. Now, I'm not entirely sure why the headlights do that dance when the hood latch is pulled and the hood is open, but they do, I guess, to confirm that you really have pulled the hood latch and successfully opened the hood. Now, next up, another lighting-related item you notice when you first climb in the GLE is all of this ambient lighting, and just look how cool it is. It really, really looks nice, and it really sets the mood of this interior. Every time it gets dark out or you go into a garage, you see it everywhere, and it's a really nice look. They've even put it around these two grab handles in the middle. They've included these grab handles for when you're going to take your GLE off-roading and you have to grab on so that you don't fly out of your seat on some crazy off-road trail. But they've also lined them in this really nice ambient lighting, and everything just looks really, really nice, luxurious in this interior. By the way, one really cool thing about those ambient lights is that they can change based on stuff you do in the interior. For example, you can see I'm turning up the temperature right now, and the ambient light is turning red to confirm for me that I'm making it warmer in here. But it's only happening on the driver's side because I'm only turning up the driver's temperature. You go over to the passenger side and do it, and then the passenger passenger side ambient light kind of blinks red while I turn up the temperature, which is a really, really cool feature. Now, when I turn the temperature down, the ambient lights are currently blue, so they're not really showing all that much. But if you go to the very bottom and now the temperature can't go any lower, it's showing white. So it's basically saying, hey, you're at the bottom of this menu, you can't go any further. And over on the driver's side, same deal. You can see blue, not that much contrast, but when you get to the bottom, it shows white to let you know you have reached the coldest it can go. Kind of a cool feature of these ambient lights. Now, next up, another interesting thing in this interior is the climate vent situation. Over to the left of the steering wheel on the driver's side, you have a rather large climate vent next to the big screen thing, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, over on the right of the big screen thing, you have what looks like a climate vent, but it is not. It is just there for symmetry, and it's kind of a dummy climate vent. And the reason it doesn't matter that there's a dummy climate vent there is that there are 4 separate climate vents in the middle, so you definitely don't need a 5th. Now, you don't get into a lot of cars that have 4 different climate vents in the middle. Usually it's 3 or sometimes even just 2, but the GLE goes all out in making sure that the interior is the perfect temperature to your liking. Now, next up, also in the middle, I want to move down to the center console where you have this gorgeous tray. It's actually a lid, and I really like the material on it. It looks like a really nice material you'd use for a deck or something. Now, you can open this up by pushing this little latch at the back of it, and when you open it up, it reveals the cup holders and the wireless charging system. These are things you'd otherwise want to conceal, and when it's in place, everything does look really nice in here. But when you have it open and you want more functionality from your center console, you can see the 2 cup holders are in fact cup holders, but if you have a larger drink you want to put in, you can move the plastic cup holder surround out of the way, and that gives you more cup holder space. If you want to go back to a smaller drink at that point, just push this little button, and then the cup holders snap back into place. They're ready to accept a smaller drink, so they're very versatile cup holders underneath this nice looking lid. And next up, I want to move on to the infotainment system. This is Mercedes' latest infotainment system, the best iteration of it I've seen yet. And I have to say, I get into a lot of cars, and this is the best infotainment system in the car industry. Better than Tesla, better than Volvo, which I also love. It is just fantastic. And one primary reason for that is the sheer controllability of it all. Check this out. A lot of times I post a review of a car and it has a touchscreen, and then people say, oh, I hate touchscreens. Well, in this car, you can control the entire system using this little pad in the center console. You move your finger around, you press these buttons, it controls the whole infotainment system. But some people don't like little pads. They prefer touchscreens. Well, guess what? It's also a touchscreen. Touch everything you want, just like in any regular touchscreen system, and it's incredibly responsive every time you touch. It's really, really excellent. You can scroll through stuff, it immediately responds to your finger. It feels just like a smartphone. But there's even more controllability. You don't want to do the touchpad or the touchscreen. You can use this little set of buttons on the steering wheel to scroll through and select various things on the infotainment screen, and you can control basically the entire screen from the steering wheel buttons as well. So there's 3 separate places that you can control things in this infotainment system, and it gets even better because you can talk to it. Take a listen. Hey Mercedes.
How can I help you?
I'm cold.
I'm setting the temperature to 65 degrees.
So in other words, no matter what you prefer in this infotainment system, voice commands, steering wheel controls, touch screens, center controls, you have it all. And that controllability is really, really, really excellent. Basically catering to the whim of everybody. No one can complain that the system doesn't work in their preferred manner because Mercedes just made everything redundant and they basically gave you everything. And with that in mind, time to highlight some of the interesting quirks and features of this infotainment system. Now, I've already talked about this system in the new Mercedes A-Class and the AMG GT 4-door, which I'll link in the description below. But there's always more interesting quirks to find, and I want to start with seat kinetics. This car has a feature called seat kinetics, and you can turn it on as you drive. It is not a seat massage system. Instead, when you turn it on, it just sort of pushes forward different parts of the seats at various times to kind of keep you fresh and loose and relaxed while you're driving down the road. which isn't a bad idea. And next up, I mentioned how much I liked the ambient lighting color in this interior, but you don't have to use this color. There are several different ambient lighting colors you can choose from, including my very favorite, which is called Color Mix. Now, if you choose Color Mix, the colors will slowly but surely change as you're driving down the road. You can go from red to purple to green, and they all just sort of change while you're driving along. So you don't have to commit to one single individual color, but instead you can have a mixture of colors as you're driving along, which is a nice look. Another cool feature of the GLE is the parking space search feature. This is one of those cars that will automatically park for you once it finds a spot, and you can press this little button in the center console and get it to start looking for a spot. And when you do, I love the graphic that appears on the infotainment screen, sort of showing this car looking for a spot. And basically the way it works is once it has found something, it lets you know, and then you kind of back off and let the GLE do its thing and park itself in a parallel parking spot, which takes the difficulty out of parallel parking. It's worth noting though, a lot of new luxury vehicles have this feature. I just happen to like the graphic in the infotainment screen. Now, next we move on to the gauge cluster, which, in keeping with the infotainment system, is probably my very favorite gauge cluster system in the car industry, mostly because it is just insanely configurable. You look at the gauge cluster and you have three basic areas, over on the left, in the middle, and then over on the right, and you can change them all. The one on the left you can change from the tachometer to various different car functions, and same story over on the right, you can change that from the speedometer to show you various different car things, and you can scroll through them and see all of your options. Now, the one in the middle defaults to showing you various trip data information. You can scroll through that and see some basic trip information. But if you press the back button on the steering wheel, you can also see a list of all of the various different things you can put in that middle screen. Your phone, your navigation, your music, whatever you like. You can click on that, and then you can scroll in the middle down to full screen and make whatever you've just chosen full screen in the gauge cluster. So you can have three different parts in the gauge cluster like I was showing you, or you can have the map full screen or your music full screen or whatever. You can configure it exactly how you want it in your most perfect configuration. And it's great. So often I see car companies put a screen in the gauge cluster and then they don't really let you change it, which kind of defeats the purpose of a screen. But it makes sense to have a screen if you can really do this much and personalize it as much as the GLE allows you to. And next up we move on to the back seat of the GLE, where you will find not all that much that's interesting back here, actually. It's a fairly simple, straightforward luxury vehicle back seat. Although I will say it is surprisingly roomy back here. There is a lot of space, especially compared to other mid-size SUV rivals. There's a lot of leg room. There's a lot of headroom. It does feel like the back seat in the GLE is more spacious than the X5, the Lexus RX, that sort of thing. Now, it's worth noting this particular GLE does not have the third row seat, but it is available for people who want 3 rows of seats. Pretty simple. And next up we move around back in the GLE, and specifically we move on to the cargo area. Now obviously to access the cargo area, like all other luxury SUVs, you can just open it automatically, and when you do, you will find a surprisingly roomy cargo area back here, although obviously if you get a third row seat model, it won't be this roomy. But with only 2 rows, you have a lot of space for your stuff. And you also have a couple of interesting quirks back here, starting with the fact that the spare tire is under the floor, pretty common. But here's the cool thing, the GLE comes with a little strap you can use with a hook at the end to secure the cargo area floor in the up position to this trim that goes around the ceiling. And that way, when you're changing your tire, you don't have to keep coming up here and opening this up. You can just always have it open thanks to this smart little strap. That's good thinking. Now, another thing I like back here, there is a first aid kit with all the typical first aid kit supplies. But my favorite is this illustration of a man who has just hit a bicyclist in his Mercedes-Benz. Looks like an old S-Class. I don't know when the last time this graphic was updated was, but nonetheless, the man has hit the bicyclist, but now he will save him thanks to the magic of the Mercedes-Benz first aid kit included in his vehicle. Now, next we move under the hood, and you can see the GLE 450's turbocharged 6-cylinder. Now, this isn't a V6, this is a straight 6, and the power numbers are really strong. 362 horsepower, 370 pound-feet of torque. Those are good numbers, and they're a big improvement over the GLE 350's 4-cylinder and 255 horsepower. I'm also really surprised that the GLE 450 is not that much more expensive than the 350. The base price is only like $7,000 higher, and to me, that is very much worth it to get more than 100 extra horsepower and way more torque. But 360 horsepower is still not an insanely huge number. I am sure there will be an AMG version of this on the way to deliver 500 and some horsepower with some snarling, angry V8. But for now, this is what you get. Now, next I want to talk about a couple of styling elements with the GLE, starting up here with the Mercedes-Benz badge. In newer Mercedes-Benz models, this badge has just gotten absolutely massive. Look how big this thing is. It's like a full-size, heavy-duty pickup truck. We're at that level. Remember when the Mercedes badge used to be subtle and small? Long gone. Now, obviously, one of the reasons it's so big is that a lot of the sensors and the radar systems for adaptive cruise control, that sort of thing, are integrated behind the badge, but nonetheless, it is really, really large. Now, one styling element that I absolutely love in this car is in the back. You can see it has these silver exhausts on either side of the bumper. Now, when you look closely at these exhausts, you can see that they are, in fact, exhausts. You look in there and you can see that they are functional. That's actually where the exhaust comes out, which is more than you can say for some other luxury SUVs. And I don't want to name names because I don't want to embarrass the Audi SQ5, but nonetheless, there are cars that have dummy vents that look all sporty and exhausty, but actually the exhaust comes out somewhere else, and I'm so glad Mercedes-Benz has not followed that trend. And speaking of design and styling, I want to say the exterior of this car looks fine. Not particularly beautiful, but certainly not ugly. It looks good, fine, normal, nothing that anybody would complain about, but probably nothing they would ever fall in love with either. I think it's a decent looking car. And next up, since we're talking about the exterior and specifically the rear, one interesting item with this car, if you look in the back, you will notice there's no immediately obvious backup camera back here. So where does it come from? Obviously, a vehicle like this has a backup camera. The answer is it deploys when you shift into reverse. Put it in reverse, and then the backup camera extends down from above the license plate, and that way it's hidden unless you're using it. And that keeps it from getting dirty when it's not in use, and that also makes sure that the rear of the GLE has a little bit of a cleaner look than if it had a backup camera just stuck here, kind of looking ugly. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Mercedes-Benz GLE. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the GLE. You know, sometimes car enthusiasts watch these videos and they're like, oh, I can tell you enjoy sports cars more. That's actually not really true. I enjoy cars like this because I love how competitive this market is. I just love how like hyper competitive. You know, the X5 has a better camera system, but this car has better infotainment, and it's just so interesting to get into each one and see how they try to one-up each other, and new ones come out constantly, and it's just so interesting to me to see how those little changes happen and which, you know, what little thing they've done to try to get a little advantage over their competitor. I just find that stuff so interesting. And so in this car, the infotainment really is the story here. I just think this is a fantastic system, really excellent. I love the capabilities you have to be able to do stuff, huge screens, really useful. I truly think the best in the car industry. And I thought Tesla was the best in the car industry for about 7 years now, and I think finally someone has caught up. On the road, the GLE is pretty much exactly as I was expecting, which is to say, quiet, comfortable, good visibility, good seating position, nothing, you know, really crazy. When you're creating an SUV in this segment, you don't want to rock the boat too much because this is such a mainstream segment now. There are so many buyers that you just can't go too crazy. And this is another good example of that, for better or worse. Some people might want something that's a little crazier, and for those people, there's going to be the GLE Coupe, there's the Velar, there's the Audi Q8, more exciting vehicles. But this is just the typical, you know, suburban mom upscale family vehicle that is now in every, you know, slightly nice suburb, from the Woodlands, Texas to Brookline, Massachusetts. This is all over. And with this new GLE, it's already very clear to me that it's a huge improvement over the prior one. The outgoing GLE was actually a very old design for a luxury SUV, so I think it came out like 2012. It really did not feel new, and it wasn't. But this is a huge, huge step forward, far more comfortable, vastly better technology, better everything, better steering wheel, better materials. It's just a really nice improvement. Cruising along, it just drives exactly like you would expect from a Mercedes-Benz luxury SUV. It does a good job kind of keeping bumps out. It's not as comfortable as the really high-end stuff like the Range Rover or even the Mercedes, the new G-Wagon. But it's exactly what you'd want. It's relatively quiet in here. Visibility is good. You can see a lot in all directions, big mirrors. It's just nice. It's a nice vehicle. Not much more, you know, to be said about it. Pretty good pickup. I wasn't sure when I got here if I would be filming the GLE 350 or the 450. The 350 on paper really doesn't look like enough. Mercedes says 0 to 60 in over 7 seconds. It's a 4-cylinder, only 250 horsepower. That is just not that strong for the US market. Usually we just get cars that are more powerful. Even this feels fine, but not like lightning fast or anything. I really would skip that base GLE 350 and go for the 450 if you can. The price walk is not all that substantial. It seems like it's really worth it. And so that's the 2020 Mercedes-Benz GLE. Although I suspect the base level GLE 350 could use a little bit more power, at least that's how it looks on paper, this one, the GLE 450, seems to be the one to have. But either way, it's a nice modern luxury SUV with a lot of great new technology and cool new features and an available third row seat. And it's a big improvement over the old GLE. And now it's time to give the GLE a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the GLE is fine, nothing more, nothing less, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Handling is about average, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Fun factor is pretty muted. This is reasonably quick, but otherwise not especially fun, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Finally, cool factor in the GLE 450 isn't necessarily cool, except that it's a new Mercedes SUV, and it gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 23 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The GLE 450 has an excellent infotainment system, truly the best in the business, and a lot of other good stuff, and it earns a 9 out of 10. Comfort is normal for the class, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is good, the interior is fantastic, though long-term reliability remains to be seen, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is strong, the GLE has a roomy interior and an available third row, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Finally, value. The GLE I drove had a sticker price of around $75,000, which is good for the technology and the brand new body style, though not necessarily for the performance. Still, it gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 38 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 61 out of 100, which places it here against rivals. It loses by a point overall to the new BMW X5, but the GLE actually wins in the daily categories. The X5 is better looking and a little more fun to drive, but the GLE has better technology and an available third row seat, which you can't get in an X5. Both deserve a spot on your luxury SUV shopping list. It's actually surprising how much space is back here. It's a reasonably roomy back cargo area as opposed to a front cargo area, which isn't as roomy because there's an engine in it.